During the Easter season, we kind of dance around the Gospel of John. We heard some from the 3rd chapter, I believe it was, some from the 9th chapter, and now we're back into the Last Supper. And it seems kind of weird because we just celebrated Easter, we just had Holy Week, we heard the whole Passion account. How are we back at the Last Supper again? And part of it, I think this is actually really fitting because you think about the experience of the disciples after the resurrection, and what do you have? You have them coming to understand all that Jesus had taught them, all that Jesus did, his passion, death, and resurrection, and now you have the Eucharist thrown in there, which really is the lens through which they can look back and see that in that blessing of the bread and the wine, becoming his body and blood, they look back through the death, the passion, the life of Jesus, and through the Last Supper, through all the things that he taught them, and it really pulls the thread to tie everything together, and they see it, through the Eucharist, that the resurrection leads to a new way of life as well. So really, the perspective is both directions. They understand what he did, but they also come to understand in their own lives what he has come for. So as we see this particular passage from the Last Supper, it makes total sense for us to go back to this because it was as meaningful to the disciples as it ought to be for us. So Jesus says plainly, Jesus says plainly, a new commandment I give you, love one another, ... Now that love one another part, that's not new. God's called upon his people to love one another for the entire time that they've recognized him in their lives. So that's not a new commandment. That's in it's in the Ten Commandments. It's in particular expressions in the Old Testament. So that part's not new. But I think what Jesus tacks on and says, love one another as I have loved you, how's that? Well, laying down my life for you, making a sacrifice of myself, being willing to give up my whole life on your behalf. You tie up a few other places, Jesus says, no greater love has one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. So, Jesus says plainly, this is it, man. This is it, to make a sacrifice for other people, to be willing to give up your life for them. And now here's the craziest part of the whole thing, though. Jesus tells the disciples that this is how people will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another to the point that I have loved you, right? Your sacrificial love for others is what will tell the world that you are my disciples. It's what will tell the world that I am at work in you. And in some ways, this is my stretch, if you will, but the conversion of the world is dependent on how well you love one another. And I make that jump. I stole this quote from Dr. Brant Petrie. He pulled it from St. John Chrysostom. And he says that, Jesus basically skips over, all the miracles that the disciples will perform, all the wondrous deeds, and goes straight to, no pun intended, the heart of the matter, and says, this is how they'll know, by the way you love one another. It's really, really profound. We sing about it, we have sung about it before. You know the old song, they'll know we are Christians by our love, right? We sing about it, it's fun, if you will. But I don't know if we grasp the full reality of it. The conversion of the world is dependent on how well we love each other, right? So, we've got kind of two resolutions here, right? If you don't grasp the full, profundity, right? The depth of that statement, the conversion of the world is dependent on how well we love one another. Well, we can spend some time reflecting on that. But ultimately, the second resolution is where we need to be going, to step out in love, to provide for the needs of each other, to step out into the world, to show God's love in a more widespread way. The conversion of the world is dependent on how well we love one another. What a privilege that we have to share in that reality. But even more so, what a responsibility to lay down our lives for one another.